Blood splattered across the front steps of a modest brick home in Westridge as Monique Davis collapsed, unarmed and confused. Officer Grant's finger hovered over the trigger again. A faint ringtone buzzed from her purse. On the screen, a flashing military ID, Major Keon Davis, U.S. Army. Within minutes, the phone call would change everything, because the Army wasn't just listening, it was coming. Before we get into the shocking chain of events that followed, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. This is a story about racism, power, and one mother's strength in the face of corruption. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens when the military answers a call police never expected. Now let's rewind, back to a quiet street, a calm afternoon, and a woman who had no idea that walking home would lead to a national reckoning. The sun hung low over the tree-lined streets of Dunley Heights, Georgia, casting golden hues over manicured lawns and brick facades. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing seemed urgent, the kind that whispered routine. Monique Davis, age 59, moved with quiet purpose. Dressed in her usual light cardigan and long skirt, she clutched a canvas tote filled with voter registration forms and handmade flyers about polling access. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and summer jasmine, but Monique's senses were sharper than the suburban calm suggested. Something felt off. She had taken this route home hundreds of times. Dunley Heights wasn't her neighborhood. Her modest single-story home sat 7 blocks east, past the invisible lines that separated black communities from the rest of the city. But she'd made a habit of walking this way after helping with outreach events at the community center. It was quicker, and she preferred the silence. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that a resident named Charles Emery had been watching from his front window, sipping sweet tea and narrowing his eyes as she passed. To Charles, Monique was an intruder, though he'd seen her before. She wasn't new, she simply wasn't welcome, and that day he'd decided to act. She felt it when the first cruiser slowed behind her. A familiar tension tightened her shoulders, but she kept walking, refusing to quicken her pace. Seconds later, another cruiser came into view, turning down the street and crawling forward like a predator in tall grass. Her feet hesitated, but she didn't stop. She was 6 blocks from home. She knew her rights. She had done nothing wrong. The lead vehicle cut her off. The second boxed her in from behind. 4 doors opened at once. 2 white officers stepped out, their hands already hovering near their belts. Officer Brent Kelman, 41, approached first. Stocky, clean-cut, always on edge. His partner, Officer Darius Lowe, 33, followed close behind. Less experienced, less certain, but just as dangerous. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," Kelman barked, standing squarely in her path. His tone wasn't a request, it was a challenge. Monique stopped, keeping a respectful distance. She spent her life navigating these interactions. Calm, clear, controlled. "I live a few blocks away. I'm on my way home." "That's not what I asked," Kelman snapped. "ID now." Lowe added, "We've had reports of suspicious behavior in the area. Someone said you were loitering, going door to door, you matching the description." The air grew heavy. Monique shifted her tote to one arm and spoke with quiet dignity. "I was helping organize voter information at the community center. I'm not loitering, I'm walking home." Kelman moved closer. "ID, or we detain you." She nodded slowly and reached into her bag. "I'm retrieving my wallet, very slowly, I'm not resisting." Her hand moved toward the inner pocket. That's when Kelman yelled, "Stop right there." Lowe stepped to the side, hand on his holster. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Monique froze. "I'm just getting my..." Kelman shouted, "Gun, she's reaching." "No," she started. 3 shots echoed through the neighborhood. The first hit her shoulder. The second struck her stomach. The third sent her backwards, collapsing onto the grass beside the sidewalk. Her bag dropped, scattering flyers and her cell phone onto the ground. The tote's contents spilled like blood. Voter registration forms fluttered in the breeze, landing on the pavement like fallen leaves. Her phone vibrated across the sidewalk. On the glowing screen, the name read, Maj. Keon Davis, U.S. Army. The call had connected just before the shots rang out. Kelman stood over her, eyes wild, gun still aimed. Lowe's voice crackled into his shoulder radio. Shots fired, officer involved, suspect down. She wasn't moving. Blood soaked her blouse, her fingers twitched toward the phone. Through the speaker, a voice called out, Mom. In a secured operations room on a U.S. military base in Djibouti, Major Keon Davis froze mid-briefing. The connection had been open for 7 seconds before the gunshots came. 7 seconds of casual conversation turning into chaos. Then the silence. Then the faint sound of radio chatter, his mother's voice, gasping. His hands clenched at his sides. Major Davis, his commanding officer, asked, stepping closer, Are you all right? Keon didn't answer. He turned to the nearest secure terminal and began inputting override codes. The surveillance satellite over Georgia wasn't usually assigned for domestic use, but exceptions could be made. Family emergency. I need clearance to retask our Georgia array for situational imaging. Code Alpha 9, civilian threat, possible rights violation, Keon said, voice cold and direct. His commanding officer hesitated. Are you invoking active defense protocol? Yes, sir. The screen lit up with satellite coordinates. The image zoomed in on a police cruiser parked across from a brick home on Sienna Lane. Officers stood near a motionless body. That's her, Keon whispered. That's my mother. Back on the ground, paramedics arrived 8 minutes after the shooting. Officer Kelman offered a statement laced with all the usual phrasing, feared for my life, sudden movement, suspect appeared to reach. Officer Lowe repeated the same lines with less conviction. No gun was found. Just a wallet, a phone, and a stack of paperwork detailing polling locations in black neighborhoods. By the time Monique reached Dunley Memorial Hospital, she was unconscious. Trauma surgeons worked to stabilize her, uncertain if she'd make it through the night. A bullet had shattered 2 ribs, another lodged dangerously near her liver. Security at the hospital was light, standard. The officers who'd shot her were placed on temporary administrative leave. Internal Affairs was notified. The local news reported it as a tragic misunderstanding involving a suspicious individual who matched the description of a suspect. No name, no details. No truth. By the time Major Davis landed in Georgia 12 hours later, he had already activated his own response team. He was Delta Force, and he had no intention of letting this be swept under the rug. Keon arrived at the hospital in civilian clothing, flanked by 2 members of his recon unit. The night staff barely looked up as he entered the ICU. 2 uniformed officers stood outside room 407. One stepped forward. Sorry, sir, restricted area, ongoing police investigation. Keon pulled out his military ID. That's my mother in that bed. I'm Major Keon Davis, Delta Force, and unless you want to explain to your supervisors why you obstructed a federal officer from accessing a critical care patient under threat, I suggest you get the hell out of my way. The officers backed off without another word. Inside the room, monitors beeped rhythmically. Monique's chest rose and fell under the pressure of machines. Her face was pale, her hands motionless, her blood was still on the sheets. Keon stepped forward and took her hand. You're going to be okay, Mom, I promise you. They picked the wrong woman and the wrong son. He turned to his team. Secure this room, lock it down. From this moment forward, no one enters without my clearance. Outside the hospital, a storm was building. Not in the weather, but in the air, the kind of storm you feel in your bones before it breaks. This was no longer a police shooting. It was the beginning of something much bigger. And the first call had already been made to Washington. The call that connected in the seconds before the gunfire didn't just travel across a signal tower. It reached into the beating heart of the United States military. In an underground communications center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, encrypted server logs captured the final seconds of a routine call between Major Keon Davis and his mother Monique. The transmission was flagged, not by accident, but because of the clearance level attached to Keon's ID. A colonel monitoring security alerts raised his brow as the gunshots echoed over the line. He didn't hesitate. Within 6 minutes, the incident was flagged to Army Central Command, then elevated to the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. Protocol dictated that any threat to high-clearance military families on U.S. soil be assessed immediately, but protocol wasn't ready for this. The system moved because Keon moved first. By the time he stepped off the transport plane onto the tarmac of a private military airfield in Georgia, Keon Davis had already set wheels in motion that could not be stopped. He stood still for a moment, breathing in the warm, humid night air. Behind him, a small team of elite operatives moved with silent precision. Captain Reza Saeed, intelligence lead; Specialist Lane Cordova, cyber ops; Sergeant Riley Cortez, tactical support. Together, they had served in classified operations across 3 continents, but this wasn't foreign soil. This was home. "Sir," Reza said, falling into step beside him, "we've begun monitoring local and federal channels. The Dunley PD filed a report calling it a justified discharge during a suspicious individual stop. They've already looped in their legal rep." "And my mother?" Keon asked, his voice steady but laced with coiled rage. "She's alive," Reza confirmed. "Stable for now, 3 entry wounds, no weapon found on site. The only items recovered were her phone, wallet, and voter registration materials. Surveillance footage is conveniently missing." Keon clenched his jaw. "They're already covering it up." Cordova spoke next, tapping her tablet. "We tapped into the police dispatch servers. The 911 call came from a Charles Emery, white male, 74, known for filing nuisance reports on minorities walking through his neighborhood. He's logged 13 calls in the past year alone. None resulted in any arrests until now. Pull his phone records, text logs, and anything tied to political affiliations," Keon ordered. "We're not dealing with paranoia, we're dealing with a system." The SUV waiting for them wasn't marked, but inside it held a field communications rig and satellite uplink. Keon slid into the back seat and pulled out his phone. He didn't call his superior. He called General Thomas Renner, his direct mentor and one of the few men in the Pentagon who still believed in the oath they swore, to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Renner picked up on the first ring. "Davis, I heard." "She's still breathing," Keon said, "but this isn't just a traffic stop gone wrong. I've got enough fragments already to suspect a targeted operation." "A local PD wouldn't be bold enough to target a Delta officer's family without cover," Renner replied, tone grave. "You think it's organized?" "I don't think," Keon said. "I know. I want authorization for a preliminary investigation under Operation Sentinel protocols. I'll compile evidence and loop in civil affairs if needed." Renner was quiet for a moment. "Unofficially, you've got a green light. Use your discretion, but be warned, if this runs deep, you're going to face resistance, bureaucracy, denial, the usual rot. You'll be on your own until the evidence becomes undeniable." "I've never needed backup to start a fight," Keon said, and the line went dead. At Dunley Memorial Hospital, Monique remained unconscious, surrounded by humming machines and pale overhead lights. A nurse stepped into her room to adjust the IV drip, unaware that a tiny drone hovered just above the ceiling tile, its infrared lens recording every movement. Reza had deployed 3 such units in critical areas of the hospital. There would be no more technical failures, not this time. Outside the room, Keon stood before a whiteboard plastered with maps, time logs, and stills from body cam feeds that Cordova had recovered through backdoor access. Each image was grainy, manipulated, or more often, missing. "They scrubbed the footage," she said, anger simmering beneath her professional calm. "Both officers' cameras lost power at the same moment. The official statement is hardware malfunction due to electromagnetic interference, which, for the record, is laughable." "Who else has access to the footage servers?" Kion asked. Only 3 people, she replied. The officers involved, their tech supervisor, and Chief Gregory Nolan. Nolan, the name struck Kion like a brick. He'd read about Nolan years earlier during an internal intelligence bulletin. Clean record on paper, quiet complaints buried in review boards, a common thread in voter suppression efforts across multiple Georgia precincts. Coincidence? Not likely. What about the emergency response logs? Kion asked. Reza handed over a printed document. Ambulance response was delayed by 4 minutes due to misrouted dispatch. The original 911 call didn't even mention a weapon, only a suspicious female loitering with a bag. The escalation came directly from Officer Kelman. Kelman. Kion memorized the name the moment he'd heard it. He turned toward Cortez. Where is he now? Desk duty, officially, but off-grid since 1700 hours. We tracked his personal vehicle to a private security compound on the city's outskirts, owned by Red Ridge Tactical, a contractor with ties to Sentinel Solutions. That stopped Kion cold. Sentinel Solutions was no ordinary private security firm. It was a defense contractor, one that had previously worked alongside military intelligence units to implement counterinsurgency strategies overseas, and now its fingerprints were on a local police shooting. You think they're running domestic ops through police departments? Reza asked, reading Kion's expression. I think they're testing protocols in low-visibility zones, Kion said, and my mother wasn't a random target. She's been helping register voters across multiple black neighborhoods. That makes her a disruption to the power structure. He turned back to the whiteboard and circled Monique's address. She was targeted for neutralization. The word hit the room like a thunderclap. The following morning, Cordova's systems pinged a flagged email that had originated from the Dunley PD internal network. The subject line was simple: Tier 1 Watchlist Davis. Kion read the contents in silence. It wasn't just his mother on the list. There were 42 other names: community leaders, educators, organizers, many of them elderly, all of them black, all flagged as influencers of targeted demographics. Reza leaned in. Who the hell put this together? Doesn't matter, Kion muttered. We have it now, and if we've got it, so does Sentinel Solutions. He turned to his team. This is no longer just a shooting. It's a sanctioned suppression program. They're testing the waters for something bigger, something national. The question is, how far does it go? They didn't need to wait long for an answer. At 10:43 a.m., Cordova intercepted a secure transmission routed through a private ISP used almost exclusively by federal contractors. The message was brief. Subject Davis not neutralized. Next steps unclear. Awaiting direction from DC channel. It was signed with a call sign that Kion had seen before. H06. Victor Hale. A known fixer in the private intelligence world, believed to operate a shadow logistics network for state-aligned interests. The man was a ghost, untouchable, untraceable, until now. Kion picked up the burner phone and called General Renner again. We've got a target, he said, a real one. Renner didn't ask for proof, he didn't have to. Do what you have to do, he said, and keep me posted. Just know this, if Sentinel is involved, you're dealing with something that's been sanctioned at higher levels than local government. You expose them, they'll come for you too. I'm counting on it, Kion replied. That night, Kion sat beside his mother again. The room was still, save for the occasional blip from the heart monitor. Her hand moved slightly. His head snapped up. Mom. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, just enough to see his face. She whispered, they thought I didn't matter. You do, he said, voice thick with emotion. You always have. They're afraid, she murmured. Afraid of people voting, people organizing, that's why. She faded back into sleep before she could finish. But she didn't need to. Kion understood. She wasn't just his mother. She was the match they had tried to snuff out before it could light a fire they couldn't control. And now the whole damn country was about to feel the heat. The moment Monique drifted back into unconsciousness, Keon Davis stood, turned toward the hallway, and gave a single nod to Sergeant Cortez. No words exchanged, no explanations needed. The plan that had been forming in the back of Keon's mind since the second the first shot rang out now surged to the forefront, sharp and defined. It was time to move. The team regrouped inside the mobile command unit, parked discreetly in the hospital's lower garage, disguised as a security services van, but fitted with enough surveillance and communications tech to rival an NSA field station. The interior glowed with soft blue light from half a dozen screens. Reza sat before a map of Dunley, dotted with nodes representing every known contact, facility, and movement tied to Sentinel Solutions. Kelman's vehicle left the Red Ridge Tactical Compound an hour ago, Reza reported. He stopped at an ATM on Juniper Street, withdrew $4,000 cash, and then went off-grid. His phone is disabled. Last ping was at a gas station in Newton County, 20 miles out. He's running, Keon said flatly. He knows this won't blow over. Cordova turned from her screen. We pulled access logs from the Red Ridge server. Kelman wasn't there for a visit. He downloaded a packet labeled Tier 1 Sentinel Ops Review. Encrypted, of course, but the metadata tags match ones we've seen before on suppressed files tied to surveillance of civilian activists. So he was there getting orders or protection, Keon said, or both. Reza nodded grimly. They've looped law enforcement into a parallel structure, one that answers to contractors instead of the Constitution. Keon exhaled through his nose, mind sharpening with every passing second. What's the compound's layout? Cordova tapped her tablet. Private land, 80 acres, 3 buildings, 2 watchtowers, and 1 underground facility, surveillance cameras and biometric locks. Their outer perimeter is patrolled by dogs and armed guards. We estimate at least 12 men on site at all times. Reza added, and it gets worse. The property falls under a loophole in Georgia's State Private Security Partnership Initiative. That means even local law enforcement can't enter without formal notice. It's a legal gray zone, one they've exploited for years. Keon didn't blink. We're going in. No one questioned him. Because they weren't just soldiers. They were Tier 1 operators trained to move behind enemy lines, retrieve high-value assets, and dismantle threats before they could escalate. They didn't wait for permission when the mission was clear. And now, the mission wasn't about politics or protocol. It was personal. Minimal engagement, Keon continued. Extract what we can, leave nothing behind. We need a full list of everyone connected to this operation, and I want names tied to these Tier 1 watchlists. If they're running a database of community targets, we dismantle it tonight. Reza grinned slightly. It's good to be back. At 200 hours, under cover of darkness, the team approached the Red Ridge compound from the wooded ridge south of the property. No spotlights reached this far, no dogs barked. The air was thick with tension and humidity. The moonlight cut through clouds like a blade, casting jagged shadows on the gravel paths. Keon crouched near the perimeter fence, hand raised in a fist. Motion-sensing cameras were mounted to the north and west, but he'd already mapped their rotation, timing from intercepted footage. He counted silently in his head, 4, 3, 2, then moved. The team breached the perimeter silently, Cortez disabling a sensor node and slipping a bypass tool into the fence's electrical feed. In seconds, the line was dead, and they were through. They split into 2 pairs. Reza and Cortez moved toward the server room housed in the operations trailer near the back. Keon and Cordova advanced toward the main admin building. Inside the admin building, overhead lights flickered. Cordova tapped her wrist display and looped the hallway cameras in a repeating 2-minute buffer. Keon moved like a shadow, his suppressed sidearm ready but lowered. They reached the records room without detection. Cordova connected a secure drive to the terminal and initiated a brute force decryption sequence. Meanwhile, Rizal and Cortez slipped into the ops trailer, where servers hummed behind a locked cage. Rizal worked quickly, bypassing the physical lock and accessing the command console. "Found it," he whispered, "a directory labeled Voter Influence Initiative Alpha Zone. It's organized by region, Midwest, Southeast, Coastal." "What's inside?" Cortez asked. "Surveillance reports, call logs, movement data. They've been tracking not just organizers, but their families, social circles, voting habits, cross-referencing them with predictive modeling to determine influence index scores." Cortez narrowed her eyes. "They're building psychological profiles to identify whose death or arrest would silence the most people." Rizal's stomach turned. He copied the entire directory to a secure drive and initiated a malware routine to scrub traces of their access. Then he froze. "Cortez, we have movement outside." At the admin building, Cordova whispered into her comms. "Thermal pings, 2 guards sweeping the hall." Keon nodded and crouched by the door, flattening himself against the wall. The boots echoed closer, voices indistinct but alert. A keycard swiped. The knob turned. The guard didn't even see it coming. Keon stepped behind him, disarmed him silently, and pressed the man against the wall with a forearm to the neck. Cordova hit the lights, cutting visibility to 0. The second guard flinched, just long enough for her to slip past and deliver a stun charge to his side. He collapsed with a muffled grunt. Both men were zip-tied and left unconscious inside a utility closet. No alarms were raised. They regrouped outside the perimeter 5 minutes later, all data secured. Keon looked at the drive in Cordova's hand as if it held a lit fuse. "What we have here," she said, breathless, "could shake Congress." "No," Keon said, jaw tight. "What we have here could shake the country." Back at the hospital, Keon uploaded the decrypted drive to a private server housed within a military intelligence facility he trusted. General Renner received the upload an hour later and called immediately. "What the hell am I looking at?" Renner asked. "Operation Slate," Keon replied. "That's what they're calling it. A pilot program designed to identify, monitor, and neutralize community influencers, primarily black leaders, in swing states. They're using AI to simulate protest responses and determine what types of force can be justified through narrative control. Everything is dressed up in legalese: preemptive community risk containment, sentiment disruption protocol. But the intent is clear: keep voter turnout low through psychological warfare and manufactured incidents." Renner cursed under his breath. "This is treasonous." "They're embedding former military operators into police departments," Keon continued, "offering departments training and surveillance tools in exchange for cooperation. Red Ridge is just one branch. Sentinel Solutions is funding all of it, with help from a PAC network that leads to sitting members of Congress." Renner's voice went quiet. "I need you to understand something, Davis," he said after a pause. "If you push forward, you're going to be marked as rogue. They'll say you violated your oath. They'll discredit your team, possibly charge you." Keon stared out at the horizon, the sun just starting to rise beyond the city skyline. "Let them," he said, "because the oath I swore wasn't to a contract, it was to the Constitution. And right now, that Constitution is bleeding just like my mother." Renner didn't argue. He simply said, "Then you'd better hit hard, and you'd better do it fast." As dawn broke over Dunley Heights, the first flickers of movement began near the city courthouse. A small group of protesters, mostly locals who had known Monique personally, gathered outside the courthouse steps holding signs. Nothing grand, nothing aggressive, just quiet voices refusing to be silenced. But Keon knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. They were watching, and soon they'd act again. But this time, Delta was ready. The fluorescent lighting in the hospital corridor hummed overhead like a warning. Monique Davis lay in room 407 of Dunley Memorial, tucked beneath crisp white sheets, tubes running from her arm, oxygen fed through her nose, her breathing shallow but stable. Machines monitored every beat of her heart and every pulse of her blood. What those machines didn't track, however, was the storm brewing just outside her door. Keon Davis stood at the window, watching the sunrise reflect off the parking lot pavement. He hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours. The fatigue showed in his eyes but not in his posture. His stance remained tight, grounded, and ready. He was waiting for movement, for retaliation, or for the inevitable twist that would try to erase the truth of what had happened. He didn't have to wait long. At precisely 7:21 a.m., a nurse entered the room with a cart marked Pharmacy Dispense Priority. She was young, brunette, with a badge that read Stephanie Warren, but Keon's internal radar pinged before she even crossed the threshold. Her steps were too deliberate, her face too carefully blank. Keon stepped forward. "Which shift are you on?" She hesitated. "Day shift, just starting. I have her IV antibiotics." "This patient is on direct authorization meds only. Nothing is administered without my sign-off." "I was told." He stepped closer. "By who?" The nurse didn't answer. Keon's voice dropped. "You've got 5 seconds to back out of this room before I put you on the floor and hand you over to federal agents." She froze. Outside, Sergeant Cortez entered quietly from the hall, weapon holstered but ready. The nurse's eyes darted between them. Her fingers flexed once on the IV bag. Keon moved first. In a blink, he gripped her wrist and twisted gently but firmly. The bag dropped to the floor. Cortez retrieved it and examined the label. Her brows lifted. "This isn't what's on file," she said. "Wrong dosage, wrong schedule. This isn't antibiotics. It's an anticoagulant." Keon looked the nurse dead in the eyes. "Who sent you?" She swallowed. "You don't understand. I was just told to." "Who sent you?" "I don't know his name," she blurted. "He said it was an insurance thing, that some patients are classified differently when they're under federal review. He showed me the authorization code." Keon stepped back. "You're not a nurse, are you?" She didn't answer. By the time Cortez ran a background check through military clearance channels, it was confirmed Stephanie Warren didn't exist. The woman now detained in the hospital's basement security room had entered the country under a stolen identity. Her real name was Celine Braddock, ex-private contractor, dishonorably discharged, with suspected ties to Sentinel's covert compliance enforcement unit. They had just caught their first operative trying to finish the job. By mid-morning, Keon received word from Cordova that their intel sweep had flagged 2 major concerns. First, a hospital administrator named Gerald Fulton had attempted to override room 407 security access hours before the assassination attempt. Second, someone had remotely accessed Monique's digital patient file from a secure server at City Hall. Keon's mind sharpened to a single point. Someone in Dunley's upper circles was facilitating the cover-up and trying to clean house. He walked straight to the administrative wing and into Fulton's office without knocking. The administrator looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Keon tossed a file onto the desk. "That's a log of every unauthorized access to my mother's chart. 2 entries trace back to this building. 1 traces directly to your ID badge." "I don't know anything about that." "Your credentials were used to issue a pharmacy override at 4:03 a.m. this morning. 3 hours before a fake nurse showed up in my mother's room with a poisoned IV." Fulton's face drained of color. Keon leaned in. "You're going to tell me who gave you access, or I'm going to treat you like an active threat to a federal operation. And trust me, nothing about that ends well for you." "I was told to give remote access," Fulton whispered. "The order came from the mayor's office. A man from the city oversight committee said she was under criminal review and that someone from internal affairs needed to verify her medical stability. I didn't know anything about an attack." Keon straightened. "You didn't ask either, which makes you complicit." He turned to Cortez. "Secure his workstation. Pull every login, every email. If even 1 file points to outside coordination, I want it archived and delivered to our encrypted cloud." Cordova's voice crackled over the comms. You're going to want to see this. Surveillance cam, parking structure, 3:26 a.m. An orderly accesses the medication freezer. He's not on payroll. He's using a fake badge. On the screen, the figure moved with precision. Calm, efficient, military. Keon narrowed his eyes. That's not an imposter, that's a trained operator. Riza joined the feed and ran facial recognition. 30 seconds later, a match lit up. Name's Jason Mott, he said. Ex-Special Forces. Discharged 2017. He's been working under contract for Sentinel since then, officially listed as a training consultant. And unofficially, Keon asked. He's flagged in a CIA domestic threat audit, Riza replied. Operates under an internal designation, problem solver. They all fell silent. This wasn't a cover-up anymore. It was a coordinated elimination strategy. That evening, Keon's team established a secure perimeter around room 407. New biometric scanners were installed at the door. A rotating presence of armed military medics replaced hospital security. All incoming medications were now chemically tested before being administered. Inside, Monique stirred again. Her eyes fluttered, clearer than the day before. Keon sat by her side, expression softening. You're safe, Mom. She turned her head slowly. They didn't stop. No, he said. They tried to finish what they started, but they won't get another chance. She exhaled weakly. In my desk drawer at the library under the Morrison collection, I've been keeping records, names, incidents, everything. He leaned closer. You were tracking them. She nodded faintly. I knew something was wrong. For months, I saw how they started targeting anyone connected to voter registration, harassment tickets, zoning fines, sudden audits, even fake calls to CPS. They were trying to choke us off quietly, but when that didn't work, they escalated. Keon finished for her. She closed her eyes, exhausted. But the mission had just come into full focus. The Dunley Public Library sat empty as night fell, its doors locked, the interior dark except for the glow of security lights near the main entrance. Keon and Cordova bypassed the alarm system in under a minute. They moved through the rows of books like ghosts, flashlights low to the floor. Inside the back office, they found the drawer Monique described. Behind a false panel was a black leather-bound binder. Cordova opened it, eyes scanning page after page of handwritten notes, photographs, scanned documents, and receipts. She's been building a case file, she said, stunned. Pattern analysis, matching names from voter drives to citations, police stops, and court filings. She even highlighted the ones who went silent after contact with law enforcement. This is real data, usable data. Keon flipped to the last page. It was a spreadsheet, one column labeled confirmed targets, the other labeled current status. Nearly half were marked evicted, fired, or deceased. He clenched his jaw. She wasn't just registering voters. She was defending democracy, and they treated her like a threat. Cordova looked up. We need to get this to Renner, tonight. No, Keon said. We're not just reporting anymore. We're going public. Her brow lifted. Are you sure? He nodded. If we stay in the shadows, they control the narrative. But if we show the country what they're doing, they'll have no choice but to answer. Cordova took a breath and nodded. Operation Sentinel wasn't just exposed. It was about to be broadcast. The next morning, the quiet tension over Dunley broke with a sudden shift in the air, one you couldn't see, but could feel in the weight of passing glances, in the cautious tone of phone calls, and in the deliberate silences exchanged by those who had been complicit. The name, Monique Davis, had reached more than just neighbors and community leaders. It had found its way into encrypted government inboxes, private Slack channels, and the early bulletins of a few sharp-eyed journalists who knew when a story was too clean. And Keon Davis was about to make sure it didn't stay clean for long. At 7:02 a.m., Olivia Sandoval, a national reporter for the Tribune Observer, received an unmarked manila envelope in her Washington, D.C. mailbox. Inside was a single USB drive and a short note. "They're targeting organizers. This is bigger than Georgia. Do not trust intermediaries. Contact direct." It was signed with 2 initials, KD. By 7:11 a.m., Olivia had reviewed the drive's contents: bodycam anomalies, false dispatch records, targeting spreadsheets, and a watch list that included prominent black educators, pastors, and volunteers. She wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or electrified. "This," she whispered to herself, "is war against voters." Back in Dunley, Keon sat in a dim conference room inside a secure facility 40 minutes outside city limits. His team had relocated their base to avoid surveillance after discovering that 2 of the original hospital security staff were on Sentinel's payroll. Cordova, Reza, and Cortez were working in silence around him. No idle chatter, no wasted motion. Reza had just completed an internal link map analysis using Monique's binder, the decrypted Sentinel files, and local law enforcement documents. The connections were sobering. He cleared his throat. "The voter suppression effort we're seeing isn't isolated. Monique's data overlaps with targeted community leaders in 6 neighboring counties. When we cross-reference that with the Sentinel Tier 1 files, the pattern's consistent. Any black organizer responsible for shifting registration numbers by 2% or more becomes a suppression target." "Methods?" Keon asked, though he already had a sixth sense of what he'd hear. "3 categories," Reza answered: legal harassment, fines, license suspensions, mysterious audits. Second, disinformation, fabricated criminal records, anonymous complaints to employers, false media reports. And the third. He paused. "Elimination," Cordova said, finishing the thought. "We've confirmed 5 unresolved deaths across those counties that mirror Monique's shooting in structure, sudden confrontations, matched descriptions, no body cam footage, no weapon recovered, no charges filed." Cortez pushed a photo across the table. "And now we know where they're coordinating it from." Keon leaned forward. It was a satellite image of a building complex in Valdosta, Georgia, unremarkable at first glance. But the metadata tied it to a logistics firm called Oakwatch Systems, another Sentinel shell company. "Oakwatch manages election security training for 10 Georgia precincts," she said, "but that's just the front. We intercepted a directive sent from Oakwatch servers titled Project Quiet Ledger. It lists population data by race and predicts voter volatility risk scores in target counties. They're using military predictive models on civilians," Keon said, each word heavier than the last. "And they're just getting started," Reza added. "Next cycle, this expands to the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, anywhere they think the turnout could shift a key district." Cordova looked up from her screen. "You wanted national exposure. You're about to get it." She turned the monitor toward Keon. It showed a breaking news alert. "Whistleblower claims Georgia police shooting, part of broader voter suppression network." Underneath the headline was a screenshot from the footage they'd uploaded, body cam timestamps overlaid with a watch list from Sentinel. It had taken less than an hour to go viral. By noon, the mayor of Dunley called an emergency press conference. His speech was filled with damage control, a commitment to transparency, full cooperation, and a thorough review of procedures. But it rang hollow. Because minutes later, another leak dropped. This one was from Agent Naomi Kwan at the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She received a copy of Monique's binder directly from Reza, along with Sentinel's decrypted logs. Her team had already been investigating a similar string of voter suppression incidents in North Carolina, but until now lacked the connective tissue. Monique's notes provided the map. Keon's team delivered the compass. In an internal memo, Kwan wrote, "This is systemic, this is deliberate, and this is criminal. Recommend immediate elevation to DOJ." That same day, at a secure Pentagon substation, General Renner presented the initial Sentinel package to a classified oversight committee. The expressions around the table changed as each frame of evidence appeared, each blurred photo of community leaders marked as threats, each falsified call report, each internal directive to neutralize influence clusters. One by one, the officials began to understand this wasn't just about Dunley, it wasn't even about Georgia. It was about power, control, fear of what democracy might look like if black voters weren't obstructed at every turn. "What do you propose?" one senator asked, visibly shaken. Renner leaned forward. "We authorize Joint Task Force support for civil affairs and domestic protection. We invoke Section 142B under the counterinsurgency statute, and we treat this as what it is, a coordinated attack against constitutional rights." The room went silent. Then a voice broke through the tension. "Where does Colonel Davis stand in all this?" Renner didn't blink. "He's the reason you're seeing this now, and he's not stopping." While federal gears began turning, the streets of Dunley were no longer quiet. Protesters had filled the city square outside the courthouse. What began with a dozen voices turned into hundreds, then 1,000. Signs rose into the humid July air. "We are not suspicious. Registering voters isn't a crime. Justice for Monique." And standing at the edge of the crowd, unseen but present, Keon watched. Not with arrogance, not with pride, but with purpose. He turned to Reza, who stood beside him. "How long until they push back?" Reza checked his feed. "Police are mobilizing crowd control units now. Riot gear, tactical vans, same pattern we saw in the 2020 suppression tests. They provoke, then record only the reaction." "We are not giving them that," Keon said. "Coordinate with organizers. We keep this peaceful, we keep it public. The truth has to stay louder than their narrative." Then his phone buzzed. It was Olivia Sandoval. "Colonel Davis," she said when he picked up, "I've seen everything, the files, the watch lists, your mother's notes." Keon didn't speak. "I want to interview you," she continued. "On the record, we're running a Sunday edition, nationwide coverage, front page." "I'm not the story," Keon said. "My mother is, and the people like her, the ones they targeted and thought no one would notice." "Then tell me about them," Olivia replied. "Tell me what they've been trying to silence." Keon paused. "Then finally, I'll meet you in 1 hour, bring 2 cameras." That evening, while the city pulsed with unrest, Keon sat in a borrowed church hall with a camera lens pointed at his face. Olivia sat across from him, her recorder blinking red. He spoke plainly. He told her what his mother had endured, what his team had uncovered, what the documents proved. He described the way laws were being twisted into weapons, how institutions meant to protect the people had been sold to those who feared their voices. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. But the fury in his voice was unmistakable. When the interview ended, Olivia leaned forward. "If you had one message for the people watching, what would it be?" Keon looked into the camera. "No one is coming to save us. The people in power won't fix what they profit from, but if you vote, if you organize, if you speak up even when they try to muzzle you, you shift the ground beneath their feet. My mother didn't pick up a weapon. She picked up a clipboard, and they feared her enough to try to kill her. That should tell you exactly where the real power lies." The lens kept rolling. And across the country, that message was about to be heard. Loud and clear. The church basement was quiet when Keon Davis laid the folder on the folding table in front of his team. It was thick, over an inch of printouts, scribbled notes, and redacted documents. At the top, in his mother's precise cursive, was a title. Community Watch List, Potential High-Risk Suppression Targets. Reza, Cordova, and Cortez gathered around. No one spoke. The weight of the file said everything. Monique Davis had compiled it alone, over the course of almost a year. It began with a few inconsistencies, local teachers facing unexpected zoning violations, pastors reporting sudden property tax reassessments, youth organizers losing leases without explanation. One by one, she had tracked names, timelines, and incidents. Patterns emerged: suspicious arrests, bogus code enforcement visits, and eventually fatal accidents. This is the same data we found inside Sentinel's Tier 1 packets, Cordova said, flipping through the pages. Your mother didn't just stumble into this, she beat us to it. Keon nodded slowly. She didn't have clearance, she didn't have tech, she just had truth and persistence. That's all it took. The binder listed 96 individuals across 7 counties. All were black. All were community leaders, educators, clergy, social workers, or voter registration organizers. And every one of them had a footnote detailing how their influence had become disruptive to traditional voting blocks. Cortez slid a sheet toward Keon. This one stands out. Terrence Dillard, former city council candidate, ran against a longtime incumbent 2 years ago, lost after a sudden scandal emerged claiming he misused campaign funds. Charges were dropped, but the damage was done. You know who the key witness was in that case? Keon didn't answer. Cortez flipped to the next page. A part-time accountant with no known connection to the campaign. She received $11,000 through a consulting firm, one registered to Oakwatch Systems. Sentinel's shell company. Rizat chimed in. That's their method. They don't silence everyone with violence. They use precision, smear campaigns, economic pressure, legal stress, surveillance. They wear people down until they either quit or collapse. He paused. But the ones who won't quit, they kill, Keon finished. Silence fell. By noon, Keon had loaded the list into a secure terminal and forwarded copies to 3 entities: General Renner at the Pentagon, Agent Naomi Kwan at the FBI, and civil rights attorney Asha Lennox at the Legal Equity Defense Network. Asha called back first. This is a civil rights crime scene, she said, voice tight with urgency. Not one city, not one department, but a systemic, coordinated campaign to suppress and dismantle black political participation. I need legal backing if we go public with this list, Keon said. Names will leak, people will be targeted again. You'll have it, she promised. I'll mobilize protection orders and secure filings. But Keon, this will trigger a war. If we prove government contractors are surveilling and neutralizing American citizens on U.S. soil. We don't prove, he interrupted. We show. Rizat entered from the side room. Keon, we've got a problem. Cordova pulled up the security footage from an apartment complex in Gwinnett County, outside Atlanta. The timestamp read 10:44 a.m. It showed a man in his 60s, Reverend Miles Hamilton, one of the names from the list, being tased by 2 plainclothes officers in the hallway outside his apartment. He was helping lead Sunday's protest, Cordova said. This isn't a warrant, it's a black bag grab. Keon leaned closer. Did they file an incident report? No, she replied, but we ran the vehicle plates. One of the sedans is registered to the Department of Homeland Security. Cortez spoke next. We've been watching the wrong side of this. Sentinel isn't just rogue, they're contracted. DHS has been funding local partnerships with them for over a year, under a counter-domestic radicalization program. Rizat pulled up the grant records. They're branding voter registration as subversive organizing. All it takes is one whitewashed security review, and suddenly a library volunteer gets flagged as a community destabilization vector. And then someone like my mother ends up on a kill list, Keon muttered. He stood, fists clenched. Where is Reverend Hamilton now? Last GPS ping was at a private detention facility, low profile, subcontracted by the state, Rizat answered. Outside jurisdiction, limited access, press won't be allowed in. Keon looked around at the team. Then, we're not going in as press. That night they hit the compound. Not like soldiers. Like ghosts. Keon and Cortez breached the rear fence at 200 hours under cover of a thunderstorm. Rain fell in sheets, soaking their gear but dampening sound. Cordova looped the surveillance feed, while Rizat scrambled the radio dispatch to redirect 2 security patrols across the compound. The facility was bare bones, cheap metal siding, portable lighting, and heavy security, designed for silence, not justice. Keon found Hamilton in a locked holding room, hands cuffed behind his back, face bruised but alive. When Keon entered, the Reverend looked up slowly. Recognition flashed through his swollen eye. "You must be the son." Keon knelt to unlock the cuffs. "You're going home, sir." "How many more of us are there?" Hamilton asked, his voice a rasp. Keon didn't lie. "Too many, but you're the first we're bringing back." They slipped out the way they came, quiet, invisible, efficient, an extraction without a trace. But the next day, Hamilton's face was all over the news. And the people watching didn't just see a man rescued, they saw a lie unraveling in real time. At a press conference the following afternoon, attorney Asha Lennox stood beside Keon and Reverend Hamilton. Her voice was clear, her message sharper than steel. "We now possess documented proof that federally aligned contractors, in coordination with local law enforcement, have created watchlists targeting black community leaders under the false pretense of public security. This list includes teachers, clergy, healthcare workers, and volunteers, none of whom have criminal histories or extremist ties." She held up Monique's binder. "This woman, a librarian, was nearly killed for organizing voter drives. That is not law enforcement. That is domestic warfare against civil rights." Reporters shouted questions, but Lennox wasn't finished. "Starting today, we are filing suit against Sentinel Solutions, Oakwatch Systems, and the Dunley Police Department for conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. And we will subpoena any agency that signed off on these contracts, no matter how high it goes." Keon didn't say a word. He didn't need to, because the next wave had just begun. Elsewhere, in a private meeting inside the Department of Justice, Agent Naomi Kwan presented a mirror of Lennox's findings to the Civil Rights Division's task force. The atmosphere was electric, tense, and full of restrained fury. "These are counterinsurgency protocols lifted straight from Iraq war playbooks," Kwan said. "We taught contractors how to destabilize insurgent strongholds. Now they're using those same techniques on voters, on citizens." One official asked the question hanging in everyone's mind. "Why would they do this? What's the endgame?" Kwan answered without hesitation. "Control not just of elections, but of narratives, of momentum, of hope. Every time a movement gains traction, they throw just enough fear into the bloodstream to kill it, and the people they fear most." She clicked the screen to show Monique's photo. "Are the ones handing out clipboards." Later that evening, Keon sat once more beside his mother's hospital bed. She was more awake now, eyes clearer, stronger. "They're finally seeing what you saw," he said. She smiled faintly. "Took long enough." He held up the list, Monique's original binder, now dog-eared and marked with colored tabs from every investigative agency that had touched it. "You built this," he said. She looked at it with quiet pride. "I just wrote it down. You're the one turning it into something." "They'll come harder now," Keon warned. She nodded. "Let them." He took her hand, firm but gentle. "We're not stopping, Mom, not until the list is empty." She squeezed back. "Then you'd better get to work." The drone hovered at exactly 400 feet above the Westridge Justice Center, just high enough to remain outside standard FAA detection, just low enough to capture thermal scans of every movement within the building. Inside, the mobile command van, parked discreetly behind a church food pantry 2 blocks away, Specialist Lane Cordova monitored the live feed on a secure interface. The signatures were clear: 2 guards in the main hallway, 3 clustered in the server room, and 1 packing alone in the mayor's office. But it wasn't the bodies that concerned her. It was the signal. "Sir," she said, turning to Keon, "we've got a live data relay from that building. Someone's transmitting high-volume packet traffic out of the Justice Center using layered proxy nodes." Keon looked up. "Where it going?" She tapped a few keys. It's bouncing through 4 domestic nodes, then redirecting offshore. Final IP resolves to a server farm in Warsaw, Poland. Guess who rents it? Keon didn't need to guess. Sentinel. Yep, and they're sending everything. Arrest logs, personnel files, internal memos, even redacted case documents. He stepped closer to the monitor, jaw tightening. They're bleeding city data in real time. And it's not just passive exfil, Cordova added. They're manipulating entries. Look here, Monique Davis's hospital report. The original version says no weapon recovered. But Sentinel's remote log has a mirrored entry reading weapon retrieved, black handgun, model unspecified. Keon's voice went flat. They're planting evidence digitally. More than that, Cordova continued, flipping through more files. They're rewriting narratives in real time. A dozen other names from the binder have been retroactively flagged as threats or linked to unconfirmed disturbances. They're rewriting the history of this town, line by line. Rizal leaned in from across the van. It's a psychological operation. They don't need to arrest everyone. They just need the record to say you were dangerous. That sticks with people longer than facts. Keon nodded. And if you disappear after that, no one asks why. At 3:47 a.m., Cortez's tap into the hospital's internal cameras caught something even more alarming. A janitor, dressed in hospital scrubs and pushing a maintenance cart, slipped into room 409, adjacent to Monique's suite. Nothing unusual at first glance. He emptied a trash can, wiped down the window ledge, and walked out. But the footage revealed one troubling detail. He left behind a small, square-shaped device on the fire alarm panel, barely the size of a coin, camouflaged as part of the plastic casing. Cortez zoomed in and ran it through facial recognition software. No ID match, she said, but the device he planted, it's not a bug, it's a kill switch, an EMP burst transmitter designed to wipe nearby electronics with a high-frequency shock. Small range, maybe 10 feet, but enough to disable security cams and medical monitors in Monique's room. Keon's eyes narrowed. They're preparing another hit. He stepped away from the monitor and grabbed his sidearm. Riza, tell the hospital director to evacuate all patients from this wing under a fire suppression sensor malfunction pretext. Cordova, kill all remote access to the building's network. Cortez, get eyes on every entry point. No one gets in or out without verification. Full lockdown now. By 4:30 a.m., room 407 was under military lockdown. Monique had been moved to a reinforced care room in the lower floor of the building, one that had previously served as an outpatient surgical suite, now converted into a secured medical facility with thick walls and Faraday-caged wiring. Cortez entered, holding a disassembled version of the device. This wasn't just an EMP, she said, placing the tiny circuit board on the table. It was configured to send out a false fire alert, which would have automatically triggered an elevator shutdown, unlocked key doors, and rerouted emergency power right before the actual blackout. Riza frowned, and in the chaos, she'd flatline, no monitors, no witnesses, staff locked out. The system logs would show a mechanical failure, classic hospital incident, no foul play detected. Cordova added, and the post-mortem, it'd show natural causes, heart failure, trauma relapse, no reason to investigate. Keon didn't respond. He already knew the game. They weren't improvising, this was rehearsed. Which meant there were more targets coming. At dawn, Cordova pulled the latest communication logs from the local police precinct. She had installed a silent tracer on the dispatch line 2 days earlier. What she found chilled the room. There was a call at 1:38 a.m. between Chief Nolan and someone listed only as C2 handler, she reported. They discussed the disruption caused by the release of Reverend Hamilton and whether additional containment would be required to prevent political escalation. Define containment, Keon said. Cordova hesitated. They referred to 4 people by first name only, based on other logs, We've identified them as a pastor in Marietta, a youth organizer in Savannah, a city council candidate in Decatur, and Olivia Sandoval. Reza looked up, the reporter. Keon's gut twisted. She just put us on the front page, he said. She's exposed. We need to secure her now. Olivia Sandoval had no idea she was being watched. She had just returned to her temporary rental home in Dunley after filming a follow-up for her Sunday night story. The segment had aired nationally and sparked a cascade of online outrage. Social media was on fire. Voters were organizing. New voices were speaking out. She was proud, but tired. She kicked off her shoes, poured a glass of water, and flopped onto the couch, unaware that across the street, in a parked black SUV, two men watched through binoculars. One of them spoke into a radio. "Target is home, lights off in 20. "Hold position," came the response, "final green light pending." Inside, Olivia stood to close the blinds. A figure appeared in her peripheral vision, a man in plain clothes standing at her back door. She froze. He moved to open it. Suddenly, her phone rang. Keon's voice exploded through the line. "Get away from the windows now." She dropped the phone and sprinted into the hallway just as the glass shattered. Within seconds, Keon's team breached the front door, flashbangs deployed, suppressive lights cutting through the room. Cortez tackled one assailant mid-lunge. Reza intercepted the second at the back exit, disarming him with a clean takedown and zip-tie restraint. Olivia crouched behind a cabinet, stunned. Keon helped her to her feet. "You're okay," he said. "You're safe now." "Who were they?" she asked, breath shaking. "Contractors," Keon replied, "sent to make this all look like a burglary gone wrong. Because of the story." He nodded. "You got too close to something they thought was buried." She took a breath. "Then we dig it all the way up." At 7:15 a.m., General Renner received the full report on the hospital's sabotage, police interference, and the attack on Olivia Sandoval. His message back was short. "Presidential briefing authorized. Report to D.C. within 48 hours. Bring documentation. DOJ task force is mobilizing. This goes federal." Keon closed the laptop slowly. "Then we've got 2 days," he said. 2 days to lock this down before it becomes a political negotiation. Cordova spoke up. "Sir, if they went after Olivia, they're not going to stop. We need to finish exposing their surveillance web before they bury the rest of it." Reza nodded. "Agreed, but we'll need more than digital traces now. We need someone on the inside." Keon looked at the whiteboard behind them. Dozens of names, locations, timelines. He tapped one of them, Officer James Barrett. He was Kelman's partner the night Monique was shot. Still active, still local. And from what Keon had heard, he was beginning to question everything. "He's our crack in the armor," Keon said. "Let's see if he's ready to talk." That evening, Keon sat across from Officer Barrett in a quiet diner just outside city limits. The man looked worn down, eyes heavy, hands shaking slightly as he stirred his coffee. "You knew she didn't have a weapon," Keon said. Barrett didn't deny it. "I wanted to say something after," he murmured, "but everything moved too fast, and when I asked about the footage, the chief told me to stay in line, that it was being handled at a higher level. I've been getting anonymous calls, notes in my mailbox. My wife got pulled over by a county deputy last week. No ticket, just a warning." He looked up. "They're watching everyone." Keon slid a small drive across the table. "Help us expose them, tell the truth, and we'll protect you, but this is your only chance to choose the right side." Barrett stared at the drive, then nodded. "They think we're weak because we wear badges instead of suits, but I won't let them kill another woman for doing the right thing." He picked up the drive and stood. "You've got your witness, Colonel." And with that, the firewall began to crack. By sunrise on the second Sunday after the shooting, the center of Dunley was no longer recognizable. The courthouse steps, once reserved for dry press briefings and small-town parades, were now a pulsing epicenter of civil resistance. Makeshift banners hung from the balcony railing. Loudspeakers hummed. Volunteers moved through the crowd distributing water bottles, voter registration forms, and printed summaries of Monique Davis's shooting, pages marked with bolded lines from leaked Sentinel documents. By 8:00 a.m., nearly 2,000 people had gathered. Not just locals, not just activists, but families, teachers, veterans, college students, people who had seen Olivia Sandoval's national exposé the night before and refused to stay silent. The story had detonated across every major network. Private contractors paid to silence voters. Federal investigation launched after shooting of Georgia woman. Images of Monique Davis lying on the sidewalk had been looped across screens for days, intercut with satellite images of Red Ridge tactical, thermal footage from the compound raid, and first-hand testimony from Officer Barrett, who had turned whistleblower overnight. And now the country was watching dumbly like it was Selma. Keon stood at the edge of the stage behind the courthouse steps, flanked by Asha Lennox and Pastor Miles Hamilton. Cordova and Rizal worked security from adjacent rooftops. Cortez blended into the crowd, scanning faces, eyes alert for anyone who didn't belong. It was peaceful, but fragile. "I never imagined it would reach this point," Keon said, speaking low to Hamilton. The older man nodded. "It always reaches this point, son. That's the thing about justice. It keeps showing up, even when it gets knocked down, but it never walks alone." A cheer erupted from the front of the crowd. A local high school student had just finished reciting a spoken word piece about surveillance and erasure. People clapped. Others cried. Then came the chant, simple and seismic. "We are not afraid." Again. "We are not afraid." Keon felt the electricity in his spine. Cordova's voice came through his earpiece. "Drone surveillance confirmed, 500 feet above, not ours." "Owned by who?" he asked. "Tracer says it's registered through a private shell in Florida, probably a Sentinel asset. But they're not broadcasting, they're just watching." Keon narrowed his eyes. Let them watch. Let them see what real democracy looks like. In Washington, D.C., newsrooms were in overdrive. Morning anchors across 4 major networks led with the Dunley story. A panel of legal experts debated the implications of outsourced authoritarianism and whether federal agencies had become too dependent on unregulated contractors. On Face the Nation, a retired Homeland Security director admitted on air that certain surveillance protocols had slipped through the cracks and may have been exploited without sufficient oversight. In response, a new leak emerged from within the DOJ. Emails showing high-ranking Sentinel executives had been invited to closed-door briefings on voter behavior modeling as far back as 2020. Olivia Sandoval, now under full-time protective watch, appeared via video link on the Daily Brief to explain what Keon's team had uncovered. "This isn't just about one woman," she said. "It's about the shadow architecture of fear that's been laid beneath our feet, waiting to collapse the moment we step too far out of line. But the story is shifting because people are refusing to look away." The host turned to the camera, and this Sunday, the line is being redrawn in Dunley, Georgia. Back at the courthouse, the rally was reaching its crescendo. Reverend Hamilton stepped to the microphone. His voice, steady but filled with grit, rolled through the speakers like thunder. 2 weeks ago, they thought they could erase a woman with bullets. Today, her name is a movement. Monique Davis stood with a clipboard and gave her community power. And when they tried to silence her, her son stood up with truth and shook the walls of power. The crowd erupted. Keon stepped forward. He hadn't prepared a speech, but words came anyway. "When I came back here, I didn't come to lead a protest. I came to hold people accountable for almost killing my mother. But what I found was something bigger something terrifying and beautiful. I found that silence is never the answer. And I found that even when truth is buried beneath 1,000 lies, it still grows roots. He paused, the crowd leaning in. They wanted to rewrite our story, but now the whole world is reading it out loud. Applause broke like a wave. "Say her name," someone shouted. "Monique Davis," the crowd answered in unison. "Say her name. Monique Davis." While the chants echoed through the square, a black SUV pulled up to the rear of the Dunley Police Department. Inside sat Police Chief Nolan, face pale, phone trembling in his hand. He had just read the DOJ order on his encrypted tablet. All relevant parties tied to unauthorized data transfers, evidence tampering, or known affiliations with Sentinel Solutions are to be detained and questioned by federal authorities. Immediate compliance required. He'd been told this would never happen. He was assured that contractors took the fall before names got traced back to brass. But now, as federal marshals entered the building through the lobby, Nolan realized he'd been left holding the bag. He reached for his sidearm, but stopped. He wasn't a soldier, and his war was over. Hours later, the federal task force raided Red Ridge Tactical. No warning, no delay. Dozens of black-clad agents stormed the compound. What they found confirmed everything Keon's team had exposed. A database listing thousands of U.S. citizens with coded assessments, pre-written narratives to justify their detainment, and predictive risk scores generated by AI models originally built for wartime enemy profiling. But more damning than the files were the payments. Wire transfers linked to PACs, funding channels tied to dark money operations, names of politicians quietly feeding resources to Sentinel in exchange for campaign data, silent suppression, and influence insulation. It wasn't voter fraud. It was voter warfare. That evening, Keon returned to the hospital. Monique was awake, eyes alert, breath stronger. She had seen the news. "You turned the whole damn country upside down," she whispered with a tired smile. "No," Keon said, sitting beside her. "You did. You planted the seeds. I just helped them grow." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You were always meant for this, not war, but the real kind of fight." He nodded. "We are not done yet." By the time dusk fell on Dunley, the town had changed. Not just in the way it looked, but in the way it breathed. The air felt different. Heavier with truth, lighter with courage. The crowds had thinned, but murals now adorned the courthouse walls. One depicted Monique holding a pen like a torch. Another showed Keon standing behind her, clipboard in one hand, rifle slung across his back, not pointed, not drawn, but there. Ready. Protective. The war for truth had begun in silence. But now the silence was gone. And the world had woken up. The office was hidden behind a smoothie bar in Alexandria, Virginia, hip, modern, and completely forgettable. No signage marked the third-floor suite, just a coded keypad beside a nondescript wooden door. Behind it, a conference table stretched wall to wall, surrounded by 5 men in tailored suits and 2 women with legal pads and steely eyes. No one here wore a badge. But every person in the room held more power than most elected officials. "Let's get ahead of this," said a silver-haired man at the head of the table. "Sentinel's exposure is a liability. We shift funding, close that pipeline, and double firewall the rest of the infrastructure. Make it look like a bad contractor went rogue." "What about the Davis woman?" someone asked. "She survived," said another, scrolling through his tablet. "But the narrative's not in our control anymore. The protests are growing. Civil rights groups have real traction." "And the paper trail?" the first man asked. There was a pause. "Messy," came the answer. "Wire transfers through shell packs. It looked safe a year ago, but now that whistleblowers are talking and DOJ's digging." "We're not going to jail over a librarian," the silver-haired man snapped. We'll rebrand, move the model overseas for now, let this cycle burn itself out. Once the heat dies down, we rebuild under new names. He stood, collecting his briefcase. Politics is just a shell game. The key is knowing when to change cups. Back in Dunley, Keon Davis was already pulling the strings of that shell game apart. Inside the converted church basement, Cordova sat surrounded by files, monitors, and digital receipts, her eyes scanning faster than she could speak. Riza paced behind her, piecing together financial breadcrumbs. These PACs aren't just funding campaigns, Cordova said. They're laundering surveillance contracts. Here, look. She turned her screen toward Keon. A visual map lit up with red nodes stretching from DC to Atlanta to Austin to Detroit. Names like Patriot Integrity Fund, Civic Trust America, and United Voter Alliance appeared at the top. On paper, they're issue-based political action committees, Cordova continued. Non-profit 527s, no caps on contributions, minimal transparency. But if you follow the payout patterns, it becomes obvious. These PACs are passing money through consultancy shells directly to Sentinel. Keon leaned closer. Who's approving the transfers? Cordova clicked another tab. A list of names appeared, some state senators, several congressmen, and one governor's chief of staff. Riza added, and these aren't just party loyalists. These are swing state tacticians. They're treating voter suppression like a military campaign, not about belief, about margins. Keon's jaw tightened. What's the total amount? Cordova exhaled. So far, $83.4 million over 18 months. Riza cut in, and that's only what we've confirmed. There could be double that buried under additional layers. Some of these donations were bundled through churches, private foundations, even emergency relief grants redirected from COVID recovery funds. Keon's hands curled into fists. They used a pandemic as political cover to strip power from the people most devastated by it, he said. Black voters, Latino organizers, young progressives. They built a machine, Cordova said. Now it's our job to break it. At the headquarters of the Legal Equity Defense Network, Asha Lennox was already doing just that. She had filed an emergency motion in federal court demanding full disclosure of every political donation made to or through the PACs linked to Sentinel Solutions. The motion cited Monique Davis's attack as the central incident in a larger RICO-style conspiracy. But the real bombshell came attached as an exhibit. Internal emails leaked by a former financial director inside United Voter Alliance. One email, dated 9 months before the shooting, read, "We need aggressive deterrence in high-flux communities. The usual outreach isn't enough. If these influencers can't be bought, they need to be discredited or disqualified. Sentinel has packages ready, just need the green light." Another read, "Our models show a projected 4% increase in minority turnout unless mitigation steps are taken in Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We either suppress that delta now or we lose red state control for a decade." The leak was damning. Within hours, the story had reached cable news. And not even the spin machines could drown it out. At DOJ headquarters, Agent Naomi Kwan prepared her presentation for the Attorney General. She didn't bother with flourishes. Just facts. The Sentinel operation, she began, was funded through political laundering. These PACs served as go-betweens, granting plausible deniability to officials while providing direct capital to suppressive actors. In return, these same officials received tailored voter analytics, pre-cleansed campaign environments, and opposition research based on illegally obtained surveillance. She clicked to the next slide. Monique Davis was not a random target. She was a proof of concept. The contractors believed they could eliminate soft targets, community leaders, without national scrutiny, and for a time, they were right. Another slide appeared, side-by-side images of organizers, one evicted, one arrested, one killed in an unsolved hit-and-run. These weren't accidents, Quan said. They were strategy. The room remained silent until the Attorney General spoke. Then it's time we treat them like the criminals they are. In a studio in Atlanta, Olivia Sandoval went live with her next report. This time, the story wasn't just about Sentinel. It was about the money, the manipulation, the motive. She opened with the names of PACs, then the lawmakers who enabled them, then the numbers, millions funneled through channels supposedly designed to support voter education, civic integrity, and election preparedness. She showed how those funds were instead redirected to pay for surveillance drones, contractor training, private weapons, and predictive software. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth did all the shouting. By the time her segment ended, social media had exploded. Hashtags trended, donations poured into grassroots legal defense groups, volunteers organized to audit local campaign contributions. And for the first time in a long time, the public didn't just feel outrage. They felt strategy. In a motel room outside Dallas, a man in his 50s closed his laptop slowly. He was an accountant, retired, and he'd been filing taxes for one of the PACs mentioned in Olivia's story, unaware of the true clients behind the shell firms he'd signed for. He picked up the phone and dialed the number on the screen. It rang 3 times. Legal Equity Defense Network, said the voice on the other end. I want to talk, he said. I think I can help. In D.C., General Renner met privately with Keon. The war-hardened officer looked tired, but determined. You've exposed something that goes deeper than most people are willing to admit, Renner said. This isn't just about votes. It's about erasing threats before they exist, the way an empire protects its foundations. Keon leaned forward. Then let's make sure those foundations don't hold. Renner passed him a folder. Here what you need to know. One of the primary PACs is tied to a former intelligence director. He's operating under a defense subcontractor named Aurelius Group, which owns partial shares in Sentinel. If you go after him, the gloves come off. Keon didn't hesitate. They already shot my mother. The gloves were never on. Back in Dunley, Monique Davis took her first steps without a walker since the shooting. It was slow, painful, but deliberate. She reached her front porch, sun on her face, clipboard in hand, and sat in the chair where she used to organize voting drives. A reporter snapped a photo from across the street. Within hours, that image would spread online, a symbol not just of survival, but of resistance. The caption, "She's still standing, and we are too." The attack didn't come in the dead of night. It came in broad daylight. On a Tuesday afternoon, under a clean blue sky, as Keon Davis escorted his mother Monique to a local community forum. They were scheduled to speak together for the first time since the story had gone national. The event was small, hosted by a historically black church, with folding chairs set up beneath a white canopy behind the sanctuary. It was meant to be peaceful. It was meant to be healing. Instead, it became another battlefield. Keon had done his recon. He'd swept the perimeter, stationed Cortez at the front gate, and Rizal on overwatch in the church tower. Cordova had installed 3 signal scramblers in case of drone interference. Local law enforcement had promised discreet support. But Sentinel had stopped playing by the old rules. This wasn't an infiltration. It was an ambush. At 2:11 p.m., a white van pulled up behind the venue's adjacent lot. No logos, no plates. Rizal saw it too late. By the time he caught the reflection of a rifle scope glinting behind the cracked driver's window, the first shot had already been fired. It didn't hit Monique. It hit the podium. Wood splintered in every direction. The crowd screamed. Chaos erupted. Keon didn't flinch. He dropped into a low stance, shielded Monique with his body, and yelled, "Go dark," into his comms. Cortez was already moving. She tackled Monique behind the makeshift stage, covered her with a Kevlar insert from her tactical vest, and drew her sidearm. Keon's pistol was out a second later. Another shot rang out, closer this time, from the church entrance. Two men in plain clothes stormed forward, automatic weapons raised. They weren't police. They weren't amateurs. Their formation was tight, their movement surgical. "Flanking pattern," Reza's voice shouted through the comms. "These are trained units." Keon didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the field toward the fire escape ladder on the side of the building. As he moved, he heard more shots, into the air, not the crowd. Intimidation fire. Not a mass shooting. A message. They wanted people to run. To fear. To scatter. And it was working. By the time Keon reached the roof, Reza was already in position, suppressive fire engaged, picking off the tires of the van to prevent escape. A third shooter appeared behind the fence. Reza tagged him with a clean shoulder shot. He dropped like a sack of bricks. Keon knelt, surveyed the parking lot, and counted the rest. 3 attackers, 2 unconscious, 1 moving toward the rear. "They're trying to extract someone," he said. Back behind the stage, Monique's eyes were wide but calm. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was focused. "They came back," she whispered to Cortez. Cortez nodded, breathing hard, still shielding her with one arm. "And they're not leaving this time." Monique looked up at her. "Give me your phones." "What?" "Give me your phone. I recorded something this morning, just in case." Cortez handed it over. Monique navigated to her voice memos and hit send to Keon. The file transferred instantly. She looked up at Cortez. "I need him to play that if I don't make it." "You're making it. Promise me." Cortez gritted her teeth. "I promise." The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. By the time local police responded, 3 of the attackers were subdued, 1 dead, 2 wounded. The remaining 2 had vanished into the trees behind the church, aided by smoke grenades and a diversionary fire alarm at a nearby auto shop. It was well-timed, well-practiced, and meant to blur their exit in confusion. Keon stood in the parking lot, shirt streaked with blood from a grazed shoulder, but eyes burning with precision. "They were going to take her," he said, voice low. Reza nodded, "or finish what they started in the hospital." Cordova emerged from the side of the church, face grim. "I pulled footage from the utility camera across the street. The van is registered to a logistics firm out of South Carolina, but guess what? That company's legal parent is Sentinel," Keon finished. Cordova's face darkened. "It's no longer a proxy war. They're done hiding." That night, Monique was back under protection, this time at a military safe house just outside the county line. No hospital, no civilian staff, just Keon, his team, and a rotation of vetted medics. Her vitals were stable, but her voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation, and her hands trembled from the adrenaline crash. Keon sat beside her bed, silent. "You okay?" she asked him. He looked at her, then exhaled. "No." She reached for his hand. "They're trying to break us." "I know. They won't." He didn't answer right away. Then finally, "They don't just want you dead. They want the idea of you dead, the version of you that organized and resisted and stood tall after they knocked you down. That's what they're really after." Monique gave a faint smile. "Then we give them a nightmare." The next morning, Olivia Sandoval aired the security footage of the attack, synced with audio from crowd members, cell phones, and Keon's body cam. Then she played Monique's final message. The voice memo she had recorded just hours before the shooting. "If you're hearing this, it means they tried again, and if they're still trying, that means we're still a threat. But I want you to understand something. I didn't start organizing because I thought it would change the world. I did it because it was right, because every vote counted meant someone mattered, And every form I handed out told this country, you can't erase me, so if they want to fight, let them, but we fight back with light, with truth, with the names they tried to bury, and we never stop. Even when they shoot, especially when they shoot. Her voice ended. The screen went black. Then her photo appeared, flanked by the words, "Still here, still rising." The clip trended within minutes. It was reposted by celebrities, civil rights groups, and major newspapers. Hashtags surged. Memorials rose. And at the gates of the Capitol, a crowd of hundreds began forming. Not to mourn, but to march. Meanwhile, in a secured boardroom in New York, Sentinel's executive director, Malcolm Sharp, slammed his fist on the table. "This wasn't approved," he shouted. "We don't do daylight strikes." "Too late," one of his aides muttered, eyes glued to the TV. "Now the whole country knows you do." He watched as Monique's face looped on every screen, her voice, calm and righteous, cutting deeper than any bullet. "She was supposed to be forgotten," Sharp whispered. "She's a martyr now." "No," Sharp growled, "she's a movement." He turned to his inner circle. "Double every trace cleaner, activate political buffers, and if any of our assets even look nervous, neutralize them." "But sir," the aide replied, "we still have eyes on Davis." Sharp stared out the window. "Then make sure he knows we're not finished either." At the safe house, Keon stood on the balcony overlooking the forest. His shoulder was stitched. His sidearm rested nearby. And in his hand, he held the small voice recorder from Monique's message. He replayed it again, slowly. Then looked up at the rising sun. He turned to Cordova behind him. "How many more on the list haven't been warned yet?" 13, she said. 5 are in hiding, 3 have protective details, the rest are moving targets. "Then we keep going," he said. Rizad joined them with a manila envelope. "You're going to want to see this," he said. Inside were new wire transfers, fresh pack money rerouted to a new shell company. "They're rebuilding," Rizad said. "New fronts, same playbook." Keon stared at the papers, then handed them back. "Then we rewrite the ending." They called it The Fall. Not in whispers or secret messages, but openly, on cable news, on social media, in courtrooms and congressional halls. The collapse of Sentinel's network didn't happen all at once like in the movies. It wasn't a singular explosion or a dramatic takedown. It came as a cascade, one layer peeling back another until the truth stood naked in the light. And when it did, the empire burned. It began with the accountant. The same retired man who'd quietly filed tax documents for one of the political action committees feeding Sentinel. He wasn't a revolutionary. He didn't wave signs or give speeches, but he kept records. And those records cracked the spine of a machine that had operated in secret for almost a decade. Inside the packet he gave to Ashar Lennox's legal team were copies of ledger entries showing disguised payouts, names of shell companies, digital fingerprints linking data analytics contracts to domestic surveillance campaigns, even a contract template labeled Community Influence Risk Management, Tier I Targets. It was a euphemism, a lie in corporate dressing. But what it really said was this: find organizers, isolate them, silence them. The courtroom in Atlanta was packed. Federal agents flanked the door. Reporters crowded the gallery. Keon sat beside Ashar Lennox at the plaintiff's table, watching as evidence streamed across the projector screen. Heat maps of targeted communities, intercepted Sentinel memos, deepfake narratives created to discredit grassroots leaders, and drone footage of Monique's second attack played frame by frame. The defense attorneys stammered. They tried to redirect, to cite national security priorities, to distance their clients from the hired contractors. But each move was met with receipts, voice recordings, or leaked messages. Ashar was relentless. "Let be clear," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a rogue team. This was infrastructure designed, funded, and deployed to rewrite electoral influence in America." Then she clicked the final slide. It was a simple line of text. "We don't need to win the mines, we just need to control the margins." Internal memo from Malcolm Sharp, Executive Director, Sentinel Solutions. Silence fell over the room, and the walls of denial cracked. The DOJ moved fast. Warrants were unsealed, bank accounts frozen. High-level political aides who once seemed untouchable were suddenly seen doing perp walks into federal holding centers. The name Sentinel became a brand of shame. The government released a public statement acknowledging that contractors affiliated with Sentinel Solutions and its subsidiaries had conducted operations inconsistent with constitutional law, civil rights, and federal guidelines for voter outreach and surveillance. It was the first official admission that a private American entity had orchestrated a covert domestic suppression program against its own people. The backlash was swift. Elected officials scrambled to distance themselves from the money trail, donations were returned, PACs were disbanded, committees launched internal reviews, and the public mobilized. Across the country, people took to the streets, not just in protest, but in purpose. Pop-up voter registration booths appeared outside city halls. Murals of Monique Davis spread from Dunley to Detroit to Denver. High schoolers wore T-shirts with her face and the words, "She voted, they feared that." Universities added new curriculum on digital suppression. Churches dedicated Sundays to defend democracy initiatives. Formerly quiet communities built coalitions, launching lawsuits, citizen watchdog groups, election protection task forces. Keon watched it unfold not with triumph, but with the weight of everything it had cost. At a debrief with General Renner in D.C., Keon presented a final operations report, detailed, thorough, conclusive. "This isn't over," he said. Renner nodded, "but the back has been broken. Without funds, protection, or public cover, Sentinel's network can't operate." Keon slid a USB across the table. "There's more, a parallel architecture, international contracts, South America, Eastern Europe, same tools, different names." Renner took it without a word, his expression hardened. "And the people behind them?" he asked. Keon stood. "They'll resurface somewhere else, but now the world knows their playbook." Back in Dunley, Monique sat in her rebuilt office, formerly a storage closet in the library, the same library she once ran, now named after her. The Monique Davis Civic Center. The town had voted unanimously. She stared at the photos on her desk, one of her and Keon at the rally, another of the courthouse draped in banners after the DOJ announcement. She was quiet, tired, but not done. When Keon walked in, she smiled. "You look different," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Older." She laughed softly, "Lighter, like you're carrying less." He sat beside her, "Because we're carrying it together now." She looked at him for a long moment, "And others are too." The final days of Sentinel came not with sirens, but with testimony. At a televised congressional hearing, Olivia Sandoval read names into the record, names of the suppressed, the vanished, the mischaracterized, each one backed by evidence, each one no longer invisible. "The true measure of democracy," she said into the microphone, "is not just who votes, but who is allowed to. And for too long, the system has decided whose voice is inconvenient and then erased them. But these people didn't disappear. They were hidden, and now we are done being blind." Keon sat in the gallery, hand in his mother. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a soldier in an endless war. He felt like a witness to a new chapter. In a press conference days later, the president stood at a podium in the Rose Garden. "The acts uncovered in Dunley were a betrayal," he said plainly. not just of our laws, but of our values. No nation can claim to be free when it targets its own citizens for participating in democracy. We are implementing sweeping reforms to ensure transparency, oversight, and full accountability for any private partnership with federal or state security operations. Behind him stood Monique, Keon, and Asha Lennox. As the cameras flashed, Keon looked across the lawn and thought not of vengeance, but of vigilance. The kind that never sleeps again. But even in victory, shadows lingered. 2 months after the collapse, Rizad delivered a dossier to Keon's apartment. Inside were foreign company names, unusual contracts, and digital trails that suggested Sentinel's core tech had been purchased and repurposed overseas. "They're not finished," Rizad said. "They never are," Keon replied. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a small folder, and slid across a fresh document. It was labeled Project Vigil, Domestic Election Defense Initiative. Keon's signature sat at the bottom. "I'm not waiting for the next Monique Davis," he said. "We go proactive." The world had changed, but the battle never really ended. Now it just had more light. And the people who once operated in darkness, they would never feel safe again. Because the network that tried to erase Monique Davis was gone, and in its place was something stronger. Truth. Community. Fire. There were no more press briefings. No more drone footage, no legal crossfire, no last-minute raids. The noise had faded, the flash had burned out, and in its place was something quieter, slower, but deeper. Recovery. In Dunley, the days started earlier now. The library reopened as the Monique Davis Civic Center, and it stayed full, mothers bringing their children for literacy programs, veterans coming in to help with voter drives, young people volunteering for new community watchdog groups. The clipboard was no longer a symbol of resistance. It was a ritual, a vow. Every Saturday morning, Monique sat at her usual spot near the front window. Same table, now reinforced. Same smile, softer but steadier. A sign above her desk read, "Registration is revolution." No alarms, no threats. Just a line of people stretching to the sidewalk, signing up, asking questions, shaking her hand. Because legacy doesn't arrive with applause. It builds like roots. Keon walked the sidewalk outside the center with a kind of reverence, not for himself, but for what had survived, for what his mother had outlived. The town had changed. Buildings once gray and quiet now displayed murals, one of Monique with the caption, "She didn't flinch." Another of Keon, in tactical gear, arm outstretched, not holding a weapon, but passing someone a folded piece of paper. His photo became a symbol, but he never wanted fame. He wanted memory. He wanted people to remember what almost happened. Because forgetting was how it started in the first place. Inside the community center, he passed bulletin boards filled with flyers. Know Your Rights workshops. Grant clinics for first-time candidates. Whistleblower legal aid line. He smiled. This was how you killed a shadow network. Not with guns, but with sunlight. Asha Lennox called from DC that afternoon. Her voice, for once, held a rare weight of peace. "We closed the last case," she said. "Every remaining pack tied to Sentinel has been audited, their assets seized or redistributed into reparation initiatives. Congressional oversight committees are still trying to spin it all, but they can't deny what happened anymore." Keon leaned against the porch rail, staring out across the lawn where the protests had first formed. And Malcolm Sharp. A pause. Life sentence, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, 5 federal counts, no parole. He nodded, "Good." "He looked at your mother's picture before the verdict," Asha added, "didn't blink, just stared." "She'll be the last thing he remembers," Keon said. "That's enough." Later that week, Olivia Sandoval came back to Dunley, not with a camera crew, not for a broadcast, but for an interview she never planned to publish. She sat across from Monique in the reading room, voice recorder off. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" Monique asked. "For not disappearing, for living through it when so many didn't." Monique smiled gently. "I didn't survive to be thanked. I survived because I still had work to do." "You changed the country." Monique shook her head. "The country changed itself. I just reminded it that it could." In Atlanta, Reza took a job at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, new division, Digital Integrity Oversight. He built his own team. And this time, he trained them himself. Cortez joined him a month later, spearheading a civilian division tasked with investigating contract compliance in law enforcement partnerships. They called it the Firewall Program. Their motto was blunt: "Before they watch you, we watch them." They had a list now, not of targets, but of guardians. Names of every journalist, organizer, pastor, whistleblower, and student who helped keep the collapse from becoming another buried scandal. Names like Olivia, like Monique, like Keon. The story didn't get a movie deal. Hollywood offered. Keon refused. He didn't want Monique's pain compressed into 90 minutes for applause. He didn't want to watch actors pretend to get shot while the real woman still woke up some nights in cold sweats. Instead, he helped launch the National Archive for Civic Resistance, a digital library that catalogued every major act of nonviolent defiance in modern history. Monique's binder was its centerpiece. Her handwritten list, smudged with coffee stains and margin notes, sealed in temperature-controlled glass. Next to it, a simple plaque. "Truth doesn't start loud. Truth starts quiet, with someone paying attention." Years later, at a school not far from where it all began, a young girl gave a speech for her 5th grade civics class. She wore a t-shirt with Monique's face on it. She was asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And she answered, "I want to make sure people get to vote." Not because she read it in a textbook, but because it lived in the air around her. Legacy isn't a headline. It's a blueprint. Keon visited the old courthouse one last time. It was quiet now. The rally banners had long since been taken down, but the brick still remembered the chants, the stomping feet, the defiance that once echoed between those walls. He stood at the steps and looked up. The courthouse now bore a second plaque beneath the city's seal. It read, "On these steps, truth was louder than fear. May it always be." He sat down, pulled out Monique's old clipboard, now a keepsake, and flipped through a fresh stack of registration forms. Even now, people approached. "Hey," one young man said, "you're the guy, right? The soldier." Keon smiled faintly, "Not anymore." "What are you doing out here?" "Same thing my mom used to do." He held out a pen. "You registered yet?" The young man chuckled and filled out the form. Keon nodded once. "One at a time," he whispered. Then looked out across Dunley, sunlight pooling over the pavement. The smoke was gone. But the fire remained. They tried to silence a single black woman. Instead, they awakened a nation. But here's what they're hoping you'll forget. This story is not over. The truth didn't stop with the takedown of Sentinel. It didn't end when the courtrooms emptied or when politicians returned to business as usual. Because what Monique Davis stood for, what nearly cost her life, still hangs in the balance every time someone is denied, ignored, or erased. They don't need to pull triggers to suppress a vote. They just need you to stay quiet. Stay distracted. Stay disconnected. Stay tired. And maybe you are tired. Tired of the cycle, tired of the corruption, tired of waking up to stories like this. But Monique didn't stop when she was tired. She stopped when she was heard. So now the question is, what will you do with what you just learned? Because this isn't just a story about Dunley. It's about your city, your county, your ballot, your neighborhood. Hear what you can do right now. 1. Register to vote. Even if you think you already are, check again. Voter rolls are purged quietly and often, especially in communities just like Monique's. Go to vote.org or your state's election site. It takes 60 seconds, that's it. 2. Know your rights. Disinformation is a weapon, and it's aimed at people like you. Know your ID requirements. Know the deadlines. Know what polling place is yours. Don't let confusion keep you silent. 3. Show up early. Vote early. Speak early. Monique showed up with a clipboard. You can show up with a ballot, or with a camera, or with your voice. Democracy doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It moves with whoever's brave enough to walk forward first. 4. Share this story. You've seen what they tried to hide. Now help others see it too. Post it, text it, email it to someone who says their vote doesn't matter, because the truth is, they tried to assassinate Monique Davis because her clipboard scared them more than a weapon ever could. That's power. So now it's yours. Use it. Use it to make sure your friends, family, neighbors, and followers never forget her name. Never forget how close we came to losing her. Never forget how easily this could have been someone in your life, your mother, your sister, your neighbor, your daughter. Because in this country, power doesn't belong to the people who scream the loudest. It belongs to the people who don't give up. Just like Monique. Just like Keon. Just like you, if you choose to act. So ask yourself one final time. What side of the story will you be on when the next Monique stands up? Because you won't get to say you didn't know. You just watched what they tried to erase. And now it's yours to carry forward.